The Trump administration is threatening Canada with tariffs over wildfire smoke it did not manufacture, price, or invoice to anyone. I am Lambert Woollingham, and this is the Daily Shear for Saturday, July 18th, 2026. Somewhere in Uvalde County, a bridge that used to connect two pieces of land has stopped doing that, which is as good a description of the week as any. Closer to home, the hill country floodwaters are still being tallied county by county, and the state's political apparatus has already moved on to appointing people to run the machinery around it. Governor Greg Abbott has expanded his disaster declaration to 28 Texas counties and formally requested federal relief funds as the state continues to absorb the damage from the hill country deluge. The death toll now stands at 2, including a 74-year-old man found inside his submerged vehicle north of Uvalde and a 65-year-old man whose Kerrville home was swept into a creek. State crews have carried out 270 water rescues, and local responders have pulled more than 300 additional residents from the rising water on top of that. Runoff is still gorging the Nueces River and pushing floodwaters south even as the rain lets up. And in Uvalde County, the FM 481 bridge was completely washed away, with state emergency officials warning that barricaded roads will remain lethal as downstream levels keep cresting through the weekend. Governor Abbott has also installed a new Secretary of State, appointing his senior legislative advisor, Robert Howden, to the office just months before a midterm election cycle that was already being watched closely. Howden replaces Jane Nelson, who stepped down Friday after 3.5 years running the state's elections, reportedly after clashing with party leadership and Attorney General Ken Paxton over efforts to close the Texas primary system. He is a veteran Republican operative who has worked under 4 Texas governors and once served as communications director for Rick Perry, so the learning curve should be manageable. He will serve as interim secretary, overseeing ballot, equipment, and voter registration deadlines until the Texas Senate takes up his confirmation when it reconvenes in January. For now, the office charged with running a contested midterm changes hands without anyone in the legislature voting on it. Down in Austin, 5 city council seats are up for grabs in November, and the candidates chasing them have combined for just over $1 million in campaign cash, most of it sitting with the incumbents. Semi-annual filings through the end of June show candidates raised more than $450,000 in the first half of the year, across contested races in Districts 1, 3, 5, 8, and 9. The most crowded of those is District 1, where term-limited incumbent Natasha Harper Madison is stepping aside and 8 people are lining up to replace her. Attorney Amber Goodwin currently leads that field's fundraising with more than $91,000 raised and roughly $63,000 still on hand. The official filing window to get on the November ballot opens this weekend, which means today's numbers are the last word before the field officially locks in. San Antonio, meanwhile, has reached a tentative deal with its police union that will raise base officer pay by 16.5% over 3 years at an estimated cost to the city of $102.2 million. The agreement follows 6 months of bargaining that included a union walkout back in April over the city's initial offer. The union had originally sought a 9% across-the-board raise, with added wage bumps and expanded health benefits, a package the city priced at $155 million, so the final number lands well short of that opening ask. The compromise also touches healthcare, work schedules, specialty pay, and leave policy. It still needs to clear a ratification vote from union membership and a final approval vote from the San Antonio City Council before anyone gets a raise. On the numbers side, The market spent the week deciding that artificial intelligence's spending does not yet add up, and the housing market spent it proving nothing there adds up either. A sharp sell-off in AI and semiconductor stocks dragged global equities down and handed the S&P 500 its first losing week in nearly a month. The Dow dropped 406 points and the Nasdaq sank 1.4%, driven by mounting doubt that the enormous capital being poured into AI infrastructure will ever show up as profit. The damage went global fast, with Taipei down 6.5%, Tokyo down 4%, Shanghai down 3%, and Taiwan Semiconductor alone falling 7.3%. Nvidia dropped 2.2% and briefly lost its title as the most valuable company on Wall Street, while oil prices spiked on the side as the Iran conflict threatened to choke off crude moving through the Persian Gulf. In India, police forcibly hospitalized activist Sonam Wangchuk on the 20th day of his hunger strike, pulling the 59-year-old engineer from a protest site at Jantar Mantar in New Delhi. Wangchuk had become the face of the Cockroach Janata Party, a youth movement demanding reform of India's national exam system and the resignation of Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan after a string of exam paper leak scandals. Authorities say the hospitalization was a court-ordered medical necessity following a scuffle when demonstrators tried to block police. Organisers call it an abduction carried out 2 days before a planned march on Parliament. The movement's name traces back to May, when a Supreme Court justice referred to unemployed young people as cockroaches, and millions of students adopted the insult as a rallying cry instead of an injury. The White House, for its part, is threatening Canada with tariffs and sanctions over the wildfire smoke currently drifting across American skies, with President Trump pledging to hold Ottawa financially responsible for the haze. He says he plans to confront Prime Minister Mark Carney directly over Canadian forest management practices, which is one way to open a conversation with a neighbouring head of government. The threat lands just as the administration wraps up a separate round of heavy tariffs against other trading partners, so Canada gets to join that list over a weather event rather than a trade dispute. Back on housing, pending home sales fell 5.4% in June, the lowest reading for that month since the National Association of Realtors started tracking the number back in 2010. The decline hit all 4 census regions, with the Midwest falling hardest at 8.9%, while the West and South each hit historic lows of their own. This stretches the housing slump into a 4th straight year, and it is happening even as the inventory of existing single-family homes sits at a 10-year high, which is the kind of contradiction that used to fix itself with a price correction. Buyers are increasingly walking away from signed contracts before closing, citing unaffordable insurance premiums and an inability to unload their current homes. Prices for mid-tier houses in several major markets remain elevated regardless, presumably out of habit, and I will note for the record that none of this improves when borrowing costs stay this high for this long. An AI cloud startup called General Compute has secured a $400 million loan from investment firm Upper 90, using its inference chips as collateral. The deal marks a shift in financing away from the expensive, power-hungry chips used to train large language models and toward the cheaper silicon that runs them day to day. General Compute is building what it calls a neocloud on SN50 chips made by Intel-backed Samba, which skip the heavy water cooling and can be slotted into older data centers. Wall Street underwriting loans against semiconductors is being framed as a sign the AI hardware market is maturing, though it also means somebody's balance sheet now depends on chips holding their value. Coca-Cola's dairy brand Fairlife had to suspend US production after a ransomware attack breached its corporate and manufacturing networks, forcing several plants offline to contain the intrusion. The company says product safety and quality have not been compromised, though the full scope of the breach and its effect on the supply chain are still unclear. Fairlife pulls in more than $3 billion a year in retail sales from its lactose-free milk and protein shakes, and it is now working with cybersecurity experts and federal law enforcement to get systems back online. The attack adds Fairlife to a growing list of American consumer goods manufacturers hit by ransomware this year. Overseas and in Washington, the theme today is who gets to run the process and who gets removed from it. Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin threatened to withhold federal election aid and pursue criminal investigations against state officials who will not cooperate with the administration's probe into voter rolls. The threat came a day after President Trump's primetime address claiming federal authorities identified 250,000 non-citizen voters across California, Nevada, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, a figure election experts say relies on outdated public data incapable of actually verifying citizenship. State officials pushed back, pointing out that the Constitution puts election administration in their hands, not Washington's. Nobody involved seems to be treating that as the end of the conversation. President Trump has also endorsed Senator Darline Graham for a full term in the South Carolina seat left vacant by the death of her brother, Lindsey Graham, calling it his complete and total endorsement. Graham was appointed to the seat by Governor Henry McMaster earlier this week, making her the state's first female senator, and Trump says he personally asked her to run in the August 11th special primary to carry on her brother's legacy. The endorsement effectively clears the field, sidelining several state Republicans who were gearing up to campaign for the seat themselves. An Israeli strike on a funeral procession in central Gaza killed at least 7 people and wounded 22 more, according to local health officials at Outer Hospital in the Nuseirat refugee camp. Mourners had gathered to bury a man killed in an earlier strike, that same day when the procession itself was hit. The Israeli military acknowledged the civilian deaths, but said it was targeting a cell tied to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, while Hamas condemned the strike as a heinous crime. A ceasefire has technically been in place since October, but the Gaza Health Ministry reports at least 1,123 people have been killed in the territory since that truce took effect. A Russian court convicted anti-war politician Boris Nadezhdin of displaying extremist symbols, a ruling that bars him from September's parliamentary elections. The 63-year-old was fined 1,000 rubles over a 2023 video in which he briefly showed a photo of the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny, which is not a large fine for the amount of political future it removes. Nadezhdin calls the case an obvious maneuver to keep him off the ballot as the Kremlin consolidates support for United Russia, and this is not his first disqualification. He was pulled from the 2024 presidential race weeks before the vote, after collecting thousands of signatures on an anti-war platform. Ukrainian drones struck logistics hubs deep inside Russia overnight, killing at least 8 people and sparking a large fire at an oil depot near Moscow. 7 of the dead worked at a distribution center in Kotovsk in the Tambov region, and an 8th was killed at a similar facility in Elektrostal. Both warehouses belong to Wildberries, Russia's largest online retailer, which Ukrainian officials say has been used to move restricted electronic components around sanctions and keep frontline forces supplied. The strikes push the physical cost of the war further into Russia's ordinary commercial infrastructure, one warehouse at a time. General Compute borrowed $400 million against a stack of AI inference chips, which means somewhere there is now a loan officer whose entire job is appraising silicon, the way banks used to appraise used cars. I assume there is a repossession clause in there somewhere. I picture a man in a windbreaker showing up at a data center with a clipboard and a tow hitch, informing a server rack that it is being reclaimed for missed payments, and the rack, being a rack, says nothing back, which in banking now apparently counts as a stable cooperative borrower. If this arrangement holds up, my next move is refinancing my fleece against futures pricing, since apparently anything that hums quietly in a warehouse now qualifies as collateral. The filing window for 5 open Austin City Council seats opens this weekend, which means the fundraising totals released today are already out of date before anyone is even on the ballot. That is enough for one morning, and I am off to double check that my own segment scripts have not been pledged as collateral to anyone. Lambert Woollingham, still an unencumbered asset for now. The day has been shorn. Until tomorrow.